He was left for dead in Tehran, but crawled 5 miles through the sewers to warn the Mossad. The concrete was cold against his cheek, and somewhere in the darkness above him, voices were speaking Farsi. Eitan Shahar could taste copper in his mouth and feel the wetness spreading across his ribs where the second bullet had gone through. His left hand wouldn't move anymore. The alley smelled like rotting fruit and diesel, and he knew if he closed his eyes now, he would never open them again. Through the grate above his head, he could see boots, 2 pairs, maybe 3, and he understood with absolute clarity that the men who had shot him were waiting to make sure he was dead before they reported back. He had maybe 30 seconds before one of them would crouch down, shine a light, and put another round in his skull. 30 seconds to decide if he wanted to die quietly in a Tehran alley or do the one thing he'd been trained never to do, survive at any cost and get the message home. Wait, before the next operation begins. If this mission already pulled you into the shadows, tell us where you're watching from. To stay inside the next secret, betrayal, or act of justice, subscribe and join the agency. Eyes open, back to the mission. The grate was old, Soviet-era ironwork that the city had never bothered to replace. Eitan had noticed it 3 days ago during reconnaissance, filed it away in the part of his mind that cataloged exits and angles and ways to disappear. Now, with his vision tunneling and his breath coming in shallow gasps, he reached up with his right hand and pushed. The grate shifted. Not much. Maybe 2 centimeters. But enough. Above him, one of the men laughed at something. A lighter clicked. The smell of cigarette smoke drifted down. Eitan pushed again, harder this time, and the grate lifted just enough for him to grip the edge. Every muscle in his body screamed. The wound in his side felt like someone had poured acid into it.
But he'd been through pain before, in the army, in training, in half a dozen operations that never made it into any official record. Pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive. He pulled himself up 6 inches, wedged his shoulder against the grate, and pushed with everything he had left. The iron lifted with a scrape that sounded like thunder in the enclosed space. Above, the conversation stopped. "Did you hear that?" Eitan didn't wait. He rolled, felt the grate fall away, and dropped 8 feet into darkness that swallowed him whole. The sewer. He landed in water that came up to his waist, cold and reeking of things he didn't want to think about. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent new waves of agony through his side. But he was already moving, already pushing himself forward through the tunnel, away from the grate and the voices and the light. Behind him, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. There, in the water. A gunshot. The bullet ricocheted off the tunnel wall, sending sparks dancing across the surface of the water. Eitan ducked under, let the current carry him around a corner, and kept moving. His left arm hung useless at his side. His right hand trailed along the wall, feeling for branching tunnels, for anywhere he could lose them. Another shot, this one closer. The tunnel forked ahead, left or right, no time to think. He went right, into a narrower passage where the ceiling dropped low enough that he had to crouch. Behind him, he could hear them arguing, one voice saying to go back and report, another insisting they needed to confirm the kill. Eitan kept moving. The water was getting deeper now, rising to his chest. The cold was seeping into his bones, and he knew that was bad. Shock, blood loss, hypothermia, all of it piling up, turning his body into something that wouldn't obey much longer. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. Because what he knew, what he'd seen in that apartment 3 hours ago, would get a lot of people killed if it didn't make it back to Tel Aviv. The meeting had been arranged through a cutout, a university professor with ties to the Revolutionary Guard who'd been feeding information to the Mossad for 18 months. Good intelligence, solid, the kind of source that gets protected at all costs. The meeting was supposed to be a routine pickup, documents, photographs, maybe a thumb drive if the professor was feeling bold. Nothing that required more than a 30-minute window and a clean exit. But when Eitan had arrived at the safe house in the Eliyah district, the professor was already dead. Not just dead, executed. Shot in the back of the head, his body still warm, his blood still spreading across the kitchen floor. And sitting at the table, drinking the professor's tea, was a man Eitan recognized from the files. A man who shouldn't have been in Tehran. A man whose presence in Iran meant that everything, the entire network, months of operations, dozens of assets, was burned. Colonel Darius Nazari, Iranian intelligence, MOIS. And before that, a face that had appeared in 3 different European cities where Mossad operations had gone catastrophically wrong. Nazari had smiled when Eitan walked in. "Mr. Cohen," he'd said, using the cover name that was supposed to be clean. "Or should I call you Shahar? We've been waiting for you." There were 2 guards in the room, both armed, both positioned to cut off the exits. Eitan had maybe half a second to process it all: the dead professor, Nazari's smile, the fact that his cover was blown before the first bullet hit him in the shoulder and spun him around. He'd gone through the window. 3 stories up, not a choice, just the only direction that wasn't blocked. He'd crashed through glass and wood, landed on a fire escape that collapsed under his weight, and tumbled down into the alley. The second bullet had caught him during the fall, punching through his side and exiting somewhere near his spine. He'd hit the ground hard enough to crack ribs, rolled into the shadows, and found the grate. Now, in the darkness of the sewer, with his blood mixing with the filthy water and his consciousness starting to fray at the edges, Eitan forced himself to focus on what mattered. Nazari was in Tehran. That meant the network was compromised. That meant the operations plan for the next 3 months, the ones that depended on the professor's intelligence, were walking into traps. That meant people were going to die unless someone got word back to the handlers in Tel Aviv. The tunnel opened up ahead. The water got shallower. Eitan pulled himself onto a narrow ledge and lay there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to remember the city layout. The sewer system in Tehran was old, built in the 50s and 60s, a sprawling network that connected to storm drains and underground channels that ran all the way to the Alborz foothills. He'd studied the maps during prep, memorized the major routes, but down here in the dark with a bullet in his side, it all blurred together. He needed to head north. The safe house, the real one, not the blown cover location, was in Tajrish, up near the mountains. 5 miles, maybe 6, a long walk even in perfect health. With his injuries, it might as well have been 50, but there was no other option. The communication protocols were clear: no radio contact from inside Iran, no cell phones, no digital trail. If you got burned, you went dark and you got out. And if you couldn't get out, you made sure the intelligence got home, even if you didn't. Eitan pushed himself to his feet. The world tilted. He steadied himself against the wall, took a breath, and started walking. The first mile was the worst. His body kept trying to shut down, kept sending signals that said stop, rest, close your eyes. He ignored all of it. He counted steps, 1 foot in front of the other. The pain was constant now, a white-hot presence that filled his entire right side. But he'd learned a long time ago how to put pain in a box and lock it away. Not forever, just long enough. The tunnel branched again. He chose the path that sloped upward, toward the surface, toward air that didn't smell like death. His hand left bloody prints on the wall. He was leaving a trail that anyone with a flashlight could follow. But he was also getting distance, and right now, distance was all that mattered. Somewhere above him, Tehran was going about its evening. Families eating dinner, students walking home from classes. The same city he'd been moving through for the past 3 weeks, playing the role of a German telecommunications consultant interested in fiber optic networks. He'd met with officials, attended conferences, smiled and nodded, and spoke mediocre Farsi with a German accent. The whole time building cover, establishing legitimacy, working his way toward the professor and the intelligence that was supposed to change the calculus on Iran's nuclear program. All of it gone now, burned, and the only thing that mattered was making sure the people back home knew why. He heard water rushing ahead, a larger channel, maybe a storm drain. The sound got louder as he moved forward, echoing off the walls. When he reached it, he found a junction where 3 tunnels met, water pouring in from somewhere above and creating a current that pulled toward a grate 20 meters downstream. Eitan studied the grate. It was newer than the one he'd fallen through, reinforced with welded bars. But there was a maintenance access beside it, a metal ladder leading up to what looked like a street-level cover. He waded into the current, let it pull him toward the ladder, and grabbed hold. The climb was 5 rungs. It took him 3 minutes. His left arm was dead weight. His right hand kept slipping on the wet metal. Halfway up, he had to stop and press his forehead against the ladder, breathing through waves of nausea that threatened to pull him back down into the water. At the top, the cover was locked. Of course it was. Nothing in this city was easy. But the lock was old, a simple sliding bolt. Eitan braced himself and pushed. The bolt moved. Slowly, grudgingly, but it moved. He lifted the cover just enough to see out. A side street, no traffic, a few parked cars. In the distance, he could hear the muezzin's call to prayer echoing across the city. He waited until the street was clear, then pushed the cover all the way open and pulled himself out. The air hit him like a blessing, cold and clean and filled with the smell of wood smoke from evening fires. He dragged the cover back into place, looked around to get his bearings, and felt his heart sink. He'd come up inside Aguille, west side of the city. He'd been moving in the wrong direction. For a moment, just a moment, he considered giving up. His body was screaming at him to stop. His vision was starting to go gray at the edges, and Tadrish was now 8 miles away, maybe more, through a city where every security camera, every checkpoint, every patrol was looking for him. But then he thought about Nazari's smile, about the professor's body on the floor, about all the people whose names he didn't know, but whose lives depended on the intelligence getting home. He started walking. The streets were quieter now, families inside for the evening meal. Eitan kept to the shadows, moving like a man who knew where he was going, but wasn't in any hurry to get there. Just another resident out for a walk, nothing to see. His jacket was dark enough to hide most of the blood, and he kept his left arm pressed tight against his side, walking with the stiff gait of someone nursing an old injury. A car passed. He didn't look up, didn't change pace, just kept moving. 3 blocks. 5 blocks.
The city streamed past in fragments. A pharmacy with its lights still on, a group of teenagers laughing outside a kebab shop, an old woman sweeping her steps. Normal life. The kind of life that continued regardless of what happened in the shadows. His phone had been destroyed in the fall. His wallet was still in his pocket, but the ID inside was burned now, useless. He had no money, no way to call for help, and no backup plan. Just the address in Tajrish, memorized and locked away in a part of his brain that wouldn't fail even if everything else did. He turned north, following the line of the mountains he could see rising against the night sky. The pain in his side had settled into a steady throb that matched his heartbeat. Bad sign. It meant internal bleeding, meant his body was slowly shutting down. He needed to move faster. But moving faster meant attracting attention, and attention meant capture. So he maintained the same deliberate pace, counting blocks, marking landmarks, building a map in his head of how far he'd come and how far he still had to go. A police checkpoint appeared ahead, 2 officers standing beside a patrol car, checking IDs of anyone who looked suspicious. Eitan turned down a side street before they could notice him, cut through an alley, and emerged 3 blocks east. Detour. It cost him time and energy he didn't have, but it kept him free. The second mile was harder than the first. His legs were starting to give out, muscles failing from blood loss and exhaustion. He found himself leaning against walls, pressing his hand against his side to slow the bleeding, counting to 10 before pushing off and continuing. A taxi passed, and for a brief moment he considered trying to flag it down, but he had no money, no story that would explain his condition, and getting into an enclosed space with a stranger was just another way to get caught, so he let it go and kept walking. The city began to change as he moved north.
The buildings got newer, the streets cleaner. He was entering the wealthier districts now, the ones where government officials and successful businessmen lived behind high walls and security gates. Dangerous territory in a different way. More cameras, more private security, more people who would notice a man covered in blood walking through their neighborhood. He found another sewer access in an empty lot behind a construction site. The cover wasn't locked this time. He climbed down, disappeared into the darkness again, and let the tunnels carry him forward. Underground, he could move faster. No cameras, no witnesses. Just the water and the darkness and the sound of his own breathing echoing off the walls. But it also meant no landmarks, no way to track his progress except by counting junctions and estimating distance. He moved through the tunnels for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes. The bleeding had slowed, but only because he didn't have much blood left to lose. His thoughts were starting to scatter. memories and mission details blurring together. He kept thinking about his daughter, Yael, 7 years old, bright eyes and questions about everything. She thought he worked for an insurance company, traveled a lot, boring stuff. She'd made him promise to bring her back a snow globe from Germany. He wouldn't be bringing back any snow globes. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, some kind of junction point where multiple channels converged. There were maintenance lights here, old fluorescent tubes that flickered and buzzed. In their pale glow, Eitan could see graffiti on the walls, debris floating in the water, and a ladder leading up to another access point. He climbed. This cover was locked too, but the bolt had rusted. He kicked it once, twice, and felt it give. The cover lifted, and cold air rushed in. He pulled himself out into what looked like a park. Trees, benches.
A small fountain that had been turned off for the season. And in the distance, rising against the mountains, he could see the lights of Tajrish. 2 miles, maybe less. He could make it. He had to make it. Eitan pulled the cover back into place and started across the park. His feet weren't working right anymore. He stumbled, caught himself on a tree, and stood there for a moment trying to remember how to walk in a straight line. The ground kept tilting. The lights kept swimming. He pushed off from the tree and kept going. A dog barked somewhere nearby. He ignored it. A car drove past on the street beyond the park. He kept his head down, maintained his pace, and didn't stop until he was back in the shadows on the far side. The safe house was in a residential area just off Valiasar Street, an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that looked like every other building in the neighborhood. Gray concrete, small balconies, solar water heaters on the roof. The kind of place where nobody paid attention to their neighbors and nobody asked questions. The key was hidden in a drainage pipe behind the building. Eitan found it, took the service stairs to avoid the elevator, and made it to the 3rd floor before his legs finally gave out. He collapsed against the door, fumbled the key into the lock, and fell through into darkness. The apartment was silent, empty, exactly as it should be. Eitan locked the door behind him, made it 3 steps into the living room, and collapsed on the floor. For a long moment he just lay there, feeling his heart hammering against his ribs, feeling the wetness spreading beneath him. The apartment smelled like dust and old carpet. There was a phone on the table, a secure line, routed through so many cutouts and redirects that it would take the uranium intelligence weeks to trace it back to anything useful. He needed to make the call, needed to report, needed to tell them about Nazari. But first, he needed to breathe. Just for a moment, just long enough to remember how. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. When Eitan woke, sunlight was streaming through the window. His mouth tasted like blood and chemicals. Someone had moved him to the couch, someone had bandaged his wounds, and sitting in the chair across from him, watching with the patient expression of a man who'd been waiting for hours, was someone he'd hoped never to see again. Rafi Katz. "You look like shit," Rafi said. Eitan tried to sit up. The room spun. He gave up and lay back down. "How long?" 6 hours. You lost a lot of blood. I stopped the bleeding, pumped you full of antibiotics, but you need a real doctor. We need to get you out of the country." Nazari. "I know. You said his name about 40 times while you were unconscious. Tell me what happened." Eitan closed his eyes and forced his mind to focus. The apartment, the professor, the execution, Nazari's smile. He laid it all out in short, clipped sentences, conserving energy, making sure every detail was clear. When he finished, Rafi was silent for a long moment. "That's not good," he finally said. "The network's burned, everything connected to the professor. Already being pulled, I made the call while you were out. Everyone's going dark, but Nazari," Rafi shook his head, "that's a different problem. If he's running operations in Tehran, if he's coordinating the counterintelligence?" "He knew my cover name, he was waiting for me." "Which means someone talked, someone in the network or someone back home." Rafi stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city. "I need to get you to the border. Turkey's the closest option. We've got a route through the mountains, but it's going to be rough even in good health." "I can make it." "You can barely stand." "I made it 5 miles through the sewers. I can make it to Turkey." Rafi turned, studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We leave tonight."
In the meantime, you rest. I'll handle the logistics. But Eitan's mind was already working through the implications. Nazari in Tehran, the network compromised. Someone had talked. Someone had given up names and locations and operational details, and the only people who had all that information were handlers back in Tel Aviv. Who knew about the meeting? Eitan asked. What? The meeting with the professor. Who knew about it? Rafi hesitated. Standard protocol. The handlers, the section chief, maybe a couple analysts. Names. Eitan? Names, Rafi. Another pause. Then, Dov Meir ran the operation. Leora Stern handled communications. Gideon Katz did the intelligence analysis. That's it. Everyone else was compartmentalized. Eitan knew all three names. Good officers, solid records, people he'd worked with before and trusted with his life. But someone had talked. Someone had given Nazari enough information to set up the ambush. I need to make a call, Eitan said. Not on that line. It's flagged. I've been monitoring traffic and there's been unusual activity on the network. Someone's trying to track the safe houses. Then how did you find me? I didn't. You called it in. Don't you remember? Right before you passed out, you picked up the phone and dialed the emergency code. 30 seconds of you gasping into the receiver before you dropped it. But it was enough. I traced the location and came in. Eitan had no memory of making the call. His last clear memory was falling through the door and collapsing. Everything after that was blank. But apparently some part of his brain had kept functioning, had remembered the protocol, had done what needed to be done. Training, instinct, the same thing that had kept him moving through the sewers when everything else said to stop. We need to assume everything's compromised, Eitan said. The safe houses, the communication lines, the extraction routes. If Nazari knows about the network, he knows about all of it.
Which is why we're going off-book. I've got a route that's not in any official database. Old smuggling trail from before the revolution. It'll get us to Turkey, but we need to move fast. The longer we stay in Tehran, the higher the chance they find us. Eitan nodded. Then, the professor, did he have family? Wife and 2 kids. They're being evacuated as we speak. New identities, relocation, the whole program. They'll be safe. Small comfort. The professor was still dead, and his death, like so many others, would never be acknowledged. No grave marker, no ceremony, just a name crossed off a list and filed away in a basement somewhere in Tel Aviv. That was the job. That was the price. Rafi checked his watch. I need to run some errands, supplies for the trip. You stay here, stay quiet, and for the love of God, don't go near any windows. I'll be back in 3 hours. After he left, Eitan lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling. His body was a catalogue of pain. The wound in his side, the useless left arm, the ribs that screamed every time he breathed. But he'd been trained to compartmentalize, to separate the physical from the operational. The body was just a tool, a machine that could be pushed past its limits if you understood how. He thought about Nazari again, about the smile, about the fact that the man had known his cover name, had been waiting for him. That level of intelligence didn't come from casual surveillance. It came from inside knowledge, someone who understood the operational structure, who knew the protocols, who had access to the files. A mole. The word felt heavy even thinking it. The Mossad had been burned before, had dealt with infiltration and betrayal, but it was always the nightmare scenario. The enemy inside the wire. Someone you trusted turning out to be someone you should have feared. Eitan ran through the possibilities. Dov Meir, the handler, 20 years in the service, decorated, trusted.
But trust was just another word for vulnerability. Leora Stern, communication specialist. Brilliant, methodical, careful. But careful people made the best spies because they understood how to hide. Gideon Katz, analyst. Young, hungry, rising through the ranks fast. Maybe too fast. Or maybe it was none of them. Maybe it was someone else entirely. Someone in logistics or tech support or administration. Someone who had access to the files but wasn't supposed to be looking at them. The apartment was too quiet. Eitan could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the traffic on the street below, could hear the neighbor's television through the wall. Normal sounds. The background noise of a city that had no idea what was happening in its shadows.
He dozed for a while, slipping in and out of consciousness. In his dreams, he was back in the sewer, back in the water, moving through endless darkness toward a light that never got closer. His daughter was there, asking why he hadn't brought her a snow globe. The professor was there, bleeding from the hole in his head, asking why Eitan had been late. He woke to the sound of a key in the lock. Rafi came in carrying 2 bags. Got the supplies. Food, water, first aid, some local currency. And these. He pulled out 2 passports. Turkish nationals. Business partners traveling back to Ankara. It'll get us through the border if we're lucky. And if we're not, then we improvise. Rafi started packing gear into a backpack. We leave at midnight. There's a truck that runs the mountain route every week. Smugglers. They'll take passengers for the right price. Not safe, not comfortable, but it's the best option we have. Eitan sat up slowly, testing his body. Everything hurt, but everything still worked. More or less. I need to eat something. Kitchen. I picked up bread and cheese. Not great, but it'll keep you moving. While Eitan ate, Rafi laid out the plan.
They'd leave the apartment just after midnight, take a taxi to the bus station, then transfer to a shared van heading north. The van would drop them off at a village in the mountains where the smugglers operated. From there, it was a 2-day hike across the border into Turkey. 2 days? You got a better idea? Eitan didn't. The official extraction routes would be monitored. The airports were out. The borders with Iraq and Afghanistan were war zones. Turkey was the only option, and the mountain route was the only way that might work. What about the intelligence? Eitan asked. Everything I saw, Nazari's presence, the network compromise, that needs to get back to Tel Aviv. I've been sending reports, coded, through alternate channels. They know the basics, but you'll need to do a full debrief once we're safe. If we make it. When we make it. Rafi finished packing and zipped up the backpack. Get some rest. We've got a long night ahead. Eitan tried, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nazari's smile. Every time he started to drift off, he jerked awake with the feeling that someone was watching, waiting, closing in. At 11:30, Rafi shook him awake. Time to move. They left the apartment in darkness, taking the service stairs down to the alley behind the building. The street was empty. A cat watched them from a dumpster. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine revved and faded. The taxi was waiting 2 blocks away, an old Peugeot with a driver who didn't ask questions and didn't make conversation. They drove through the city in silence, watching the lights stream past, watching for any sign of pursuit. At the bus station, they bought tickets with cash and waited in a corner away from the cameras. The van arrived 20 minutes late, packed with passengers and luggage and the smell of diesel and sweat. Eitan and Rafi squeezed into the back, and the van pulled out onto the highway heading north. The city fell away behind them. The mountains rose ahead, dark shapes against a darker sky. Inside the van, people dozed and children whimpered, and someone's phone played music at low volume. Eitan felt his body starting to shut down again. The pain had returned, sharper now, demanding attention. He'd refused the painkillers Rafi offered because he needed to stay alert. But staying alert was getting harder with every mile. Rafi leaned close and spoke in Hebrew, too low for anyone else to hear. There's something you need to know about Nazari. What? He's not just counterintelligence. He's running a task force specifically targeting Mossad operations. Has been for the past 2 years. Every blown operation, every dead asset, every failed mission in Iran, there's a pattern, and he's at the center of it. You're saying he has someone inside. I'm saying he's had someone inside for a while, long enough to do serious damage, long enough that pulling you out might not be enough. Eitan processed that. If Nazari had been running a mole for 2 years, the damage would be extensive. Operations compromised, intelligence corrupted, lives lost. And the worst part was that the mole was still active, still passing information, still helping Nazari tighten the noose. Who knows about this? Eitan asked.
Handful of people, section chiefs, maybe the director. It's being handled quietly, internal investigation. But these things take time, and in the meantime, Nazari keeps winning. The van hit a pothole. Itan gasped as pain shot through his side. Rafi grabbed his shoulder, steadied him. "We'll get you out," Rafi said, "and then we'll figure out who's talking. But first things first." The van climbed into the mountains. The road got rougher. The temperature dropped. Outside the windows, the landscape turned from city lights to dark hills to snow-covered peaks that gleamed in the moonlight. They reached the village just before dawn.
A collection of stone houses clinging to the mountainside, smoke rising from chimneys, sheep penned in yards. The van dropped them off at the edge of town, and they walked through the empty streets toward a house that Rafi said belonged to the smuggler. An old man answered the door. He looked at them with eyes that had seen too much and said too little. Rafi spoke to him in Farsi, negotiated in hushed tones, and passed him an envelope. The old man counted the money, nodded, and gestured for them to wait. 20 minutes later, a younger man appeared, 30s, lean, with the weathered face of someone who spent their life in the mountains. He looked at Itan, saw the way he was favoring his side, and shook his head. "He won't make it," the man said in Farsi. "He'll make it," Rafi replied. 2 days, hard terrain, snow, and he's already hurt. We don't have a choice." The smuggler considered this, then shrugged. "Your money, your problem. We leave in an hour." They waited in the old man's kitchen, drinking tea that tasted like cardamom and dirt. Itan could feel his body giving up, could feel the internal bleeding getting worse, but he couldn't show it, couldn't give them a reason to leave him behind. When the hour was up, they followed the smuggler out of the village and into the mountains. The trail was barely visible, a narrow path that wound between rocks and stunted trees, climbing steadily toward the ridgeline. The smuggler moved fast, never looking back, expecting them to keep up. Rafi stayed close to Itan, ready to catch him if he fell. The first hour was manageable. The second hour was harder. By the third hour, Itan was moving on pure will, his body beyond pain, beyond exhaustion, running on some reserve that he didn't know he had. The sun came up. The mountains stretched out around them, beautiful and terrible. Snow-covered peaks, deep valleys, eagles circling overhead. It looked like the kind of place where men went to disappear.
They stopped at midday. The smuggler passed out bread and water. Eitan tried to eat but couldn't. His stomach had turned against him. He drank water and lay in the snow, feeling the cold seep through his clothes, feeling his body temperature drop. Rafi crouched beside him. "Talk to me." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're dying." "Not yet." "Eitan, not yet." He forced himself to sit up, forced himself to take another drink of water. "How much farther?" 10 miles, maybe 12. We should make the border by tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning, an eternity away, but also close enough to taste, close enough to believe in. They kept moving. The afternoon turned to evening. The temperature dropped below freezing. Eitan's hands stopped working properly. He kept stumbling, kept catching himself at the last second, kept pushing forward because stopping meant dying, and he wasn't ready for that yet. As darkness fell, they found a cave, a shallow depression in the rock face, barely big enough for all three of them. The smuggler built a small fire, just enough to take the edge off the cold. They huddled around it, not speaking, conserving warmth. Eitan dozed, woke, dozed again. In his dreams, he was home, in the apartment in Tel Aviv with his daughter, reading her a story about a princess and a tower and a rescue that came just in time. When he woke, Rafi was shaking him. "We need to keep moving. Can't stay here." "Why?" "Patrols. Iranian border guards. The smuggler says they've increased activity in the past week. We need to get across before dawn." Eitan stood. The world tilted. He steadied himself and nodded. They left the cave and climbed through darkness, following the smuggler's lead. The trail got steeper. The rocks got slippery with ice. Eitan fell twice, caught himself both times, kept moving. At some point, he realized he couldn't feel his feet anymore. His hands were numb. His face was frozen. But the numbness was almost a blessing. It meant less pain. It meant he could focus on putting one foot in front of the other without the constant distraction of his body screaming at him to stop. The smuggler held up a hand. Everyone stopped. Ahead, in the valley below, lights moved. Vehicles, patrol trucks maybe. The smuggler pointed to a different path, one that led higher into the mountains, away from the lights. They climbed. The new path was worse, barely a trail at all, just loose rocks and snow and the edge of a cliff that dropped away into darkness. Eitan moved carefully, testing each step, trying not to look down. Behind him, Rafi spoke in a low voice. Almost there, just a little farther. But the little farther turned into an hour, then 2 hours. The mountains seemed endless. Every ridge they crested revealed another ridge beyond it. Every valley they crossed led to another climb. Eitan's mind started to wander. He thought about his training, about the instructors who'd pushed him past his limits and then pushed harder. He thought about his first mission, how scared he'd been, how certain he was going to fail. He thought about all the operations that had gone right, and the few that had gone wrong, and the people who hadn't made it home. He thought about the professor's wife and 2 kids, starting over somewhere with new names and new lives. He thought about Nazari and the mole, and the intelligence that was rotting from the inside. He thought about all the ways a secret could kill you, even when you'd done everything right. And he thought about his daughter, waiting for a snow globe that would never come. The smuggler stopped again. This time he turned and pointed ahead. Turkey. 1 more mile. 1 more mile. Eitan looked up. The sky was starting to lighten, dawn coming. 1 more mile between him and safety, between death and survival, between the mission failing and the intelligence getting home. He took a breath and kept moving. The border was marked by nothing. No fence, no sign. Just a line on a map that meant everything. The smuggler stopped at a cairn of stones and gestured. There, Turkey. You're safe. Rafi paid him the rest of the money. The smuggler counted it, nodded, and turned back the way they'd come, disappearing into the gray dawn like a ghost. Eitan stood on Turkish soil and felt nothing. No relief, no triumph. Just exhaustion so complete that he could barely remember why he'd been running in the first place. There's a town 5 miles down the mountain, Rafi said. We can get medical help there, get you cleaned up, make contact with the extraction team. 5 more miles. Eitan nodded. What was 5 more miles after everything else? They started down the mountain. The town was small, a handful of buildings clustered around a mosque and a market square, the kind of place where strangers were noticed but not questioned. Rafi found a doctor who asked no questions and took cash. The doctor cleaned Eitan's wounds, gave him antibiotics, and told him in broken English that he should be in a hospital. Soon, Eitan said. From the doctor's clinic they made contact. A secure phone call routed through so many relays that it took 5 minutes to connect. When it did, the voice on the other end was Dav Meir. Report. Eitan gave him everything. Nazari, the compromised network, the execution, the mole. All of it laid out in clear, precise language that left no room for misinterpretation. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Then, we'll handle it. Both of you get to the safe house in Ankara. Wait for extraction. And, Eitan? Yes. Good work. You did what needed to be done. The line went dead. Rafi looked at him. Feel better? No. Me neither. They left the clinic and walked through the town toward the bus station. The morning was bright and cold. People were opening shops, starting their day, going about their normal lives.
Eitan envied them. Their biggest concerns were probably paying bills and feeding families and making it through another winter. They didn't know about networks or moles or men who smiled while they burned your life down. The bus to Ankara left at noon. They bought tickets and found seats in the back. Eitan leaned against the window and watched Turkey roll past, brown hills and small farms and occasional glimpses of the Kurdish countryside. It was beautiful in a harsh way, the kind of beauty that didn't care if you lived or died. Rafi dozed. Eitan tried but couldn't. His mind kept returning to the apartment in Tehran, to Nazari's smile, to the professor's body, to the question that had been gnawing at him since he'd woken up in the safe house. Who was the mole? In Ankara, the safe house was an apartment in the Chankaya district, clean, anonymous, the kind of place that could be abandoned in 5 minutes if necessary. They arrived after dark, checked the perimeter, and let themselves in. The extraction team would arrive in 2 days. Until then, they waited. Etan spent the time sleeping and trying to heal. His body was slowly putting itself back together, but the damage was extensive. The bullet wounds would leave scars. The internal bleeding had been stopped, but the doctor had warned him about complications, infection, organ damage, the kind of things that could kill you weeks after you thought you were safe. On the second day, Rafi brought news. They found him. Who? The mole. Gideon Katz, the analyst. Etan felt something cold settle in his chest. You're sure? Phone records, financial transactions, meeting logs. He'd been passing information to Nazari for 18 months. Everything. Operations, safe houses, asset lists, the whole network. Why? Money, ideology, the usual reasons. They're still interrogating him, but it looks like Nazari recruited him during a conference in Vienna. Slow burn. Started small, then got bigger.
By the time we caught him, the damage was catastrophic. Etan thought about Gideon. Young, ambitious, smart. All the qualities that made a good officer, and also all the qualities that made someone vulnerable to recruitment. What happens to him? Trial? Prison? He'll never see daylight again. Rafi paused. But the damage is done. We lost the Iran network, lost 2 years of operations, lost people, and Nazari is still out there. He won't be for long. What do you mean? I mean we know who he is now. We know what he looks like. We know he's running counterintelligence in Tehran. That's more than we had before. And the Mossad has a long memory. Rafi smiled. You think they'll go after him? I know they will. Not today. Maybe not this year. But eventually. Because that's how it works. You burn us, we burn you back. That's the game. Some game. It's the only one we've got. The extraction team arrived the next morning. 2 officers with Turkish passports and a van with diplomatic plates. They drove Etan and Rafi to the airport, processed them through a private terminal, and put them on a charter flight to Tel Aviv. Etan slept most of the way. When he woke, they were descending over the Mediterranean. He could see the coastline, the buildings of Tel Aviv rising from the sand. Home. They landed at a military airfield. A doctor was waiting. Etan was taken straight to a hospital where they ran tests, pumped him full of fluids, and told him he was lucky to be alive. He spent 3 days in the hospital. On the 4th day, Dov Mayer visited. You look better. I feel like I got shot twice and crawled through 5 miles of sewers. Fair. Dov pulled up a chair. We need to talk about Tehran. I already gave my report. I know. But there are questions. About what you saw. About Nazari. About the operation. Etan told him everything again. Every detail, every moment. From the apartment, to the sewer, to the mountains, to the border.
Dov listened without interrupting, taking notes, asking occasional clarifying questions. When Etan finished, Dov was quiet for a long moment. Gideon confessed, he finally said. Gave us everything. Names, dates, methods. Nazari had been running him for 18 months. During that time, we lost 14 operations, 23 assets, and probably dozens more that we don't even know about yet. How did we miss it? We didn't, not entirely. There were red flags, unusual patterns, but nothing concrete. And Gideon was good. He knew how to hide his tracks. Dov shook his head. This is going to change things. Protocols, security, trust. Everything gets tighter now. What about me? What about you? Am I still operational? You just took 2 bullets and crawled through a sewer. Most people would retire after that. I'm not most people. Dov smiled. No, you're not. Take the medical leave, heal, spend time with your daughter, and when you're ready, we'll talk. After he left, Etan lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the professor, about Gideon, about Nazari and the mole and all the lives that had been destroyed because one man decided to betray the people who trusted him. He thought about the cost, not just the physical cost, the bullets and the blood and the miles walked through pain, but the other cost, the one that didn't show up in medical reports. The cost of knowing that someone you trusted had sold you out. The cost of wondering if the next person would do the same. The cost of living in a world where loyalty was just a word, and truth was whatever served the moment. But he also thought about the choice, the decision he'd made in that Tehran alley to survive at any cost, to crawl through darkness and cold and pain, because the mission mattered more than comfort, because getting the intelligence home meant saving lives. That was the job. That was the only job that mattered.
His daughter visited that evening, Yael, 7 years old, carrying a drawing she'd made of him as a superhero. She climbed into the hospital bed and told him about school and her friends and a cat she'd seen in the neighborhood. She didn't ask about his injuries. His wife had probably told her he'd been in an accident, something simple, something a child could understand. "Did you bring me a snow globe?" Yael asked. Etan's heart broke a little. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I couldn't this time." "That's okay." She hugged him. "As long as you came home. As long as you came home." He held her and felt the weight of everything he'd done to make that possible. The alley, the sewer, the mountains, the border, all of it for this moment, for the chance to hold his daughter and know that the mission had succeeded. The intelligence had made it home. The network had been protected. Nazari's advantage had been neutralized. And somewhere in Tehran, in an office with blinds drawn against the sun, a man named Darius Nazari was probably receiving word that his mole had been caught, that his network was collapsing, that the Mossad was coming for him. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually. Because that was how it worked in the shadows. Every action had a consequence. Every betrayal had a price. And the men and women who operated in the darkness never forgot. Never forgave. Never stopped. Etan closed his eyes and let his daughter's warmth chase away the cold that had settled into his bones. Let the sound of her voice replace the echo of gunshots and rushing water and the silence of the sewer. He was home. And for now, that was enough. 3 weeks later, Etan returned to work. His wounds had healed enough that he could move without pain. The doctors had cleared him for desk duty, though everyone knew desk duty wouldn't last long. The office was different now. More security checkpoints, more background checks, more paranoia.
The Gideon incident had shaken everyone. Trust had become a luxury no one could afford. Etan's first day back, Leora Stern stopped by his desk. "Heard about Tehran," she said. "Hell of a thing." "Yeah. You doing okay?" "Getting there." She nodded. "Listen, I know things are weird right now, with Gideon and everything, but I want you to know, some of us are still solid, still doing the job for the right reasons." "I know." "Good." She started to leave, then turned back. "And Etan, that thing you did, crawling through the sewers, getting the intelligence home, that's what this is all about. That's why we do this." After she left, Etan sat at his desk and looked at the files stacked in front of him. Operational reports, intelligence summaries, threat assessments, the endless work of keeping the country safe. His phone buzzed, a message from Rafi. "Drinks tonight? Got something you need to hear." Etan texted back. "Where?" "The usual place, 8 o'clock. The usual place was a bar in South Tel Aviv. Quiet, off the tourist routes. The kind of place where intelligence officers went to talk without being overheard. Rafi was already there when Etan arrived, 2 beers on the table. He raised one in greeting. "To surviving Tehran." They drank. The beer was cold and good. After a moment, Rafi leaned forward. "Got word from our friends in Istanbul. Nazari's gone dark. Disappeared from Tehran about 2 weeks ago. No one knows where. Running? Maybe. Or maybe he's just being careful. Either way, he's off the board for now." Rafi paused. "But here's the interesting part. Before he disappeared, he sent a message. Went through back channels, intermediaries, the whole thing. But it reached the right people. What did it say? He wants to talk. Says he has information. Names. Operations. Things we'd be interested in." Etan felt his jaw tighten. He's trying to flip. Looks that way. And the higher-ups are actually considering it.
the intelligence he could provide. He executed the professor, set up the ambush, ran a mole inside the Mossad for 18 months, and now he wants to deal? I know, but that's the business. Sometimes the enemy becomes the asset. Sometimes the asset becomes the enemy. It's all fluid. Etan took another drink. He thought about Nazari's smile, about the professor's body, about all the people who died because of the information Nazari had been getting from Gideon. Tell them no. What? Tell them no deal. Some people don't get to walk away. Rafi studied him. That's not your call to make. I know, but I'm making it anyway. Nazari doesn't get to trade his way out of this. He burned too many people, killed too many assets. He made this personal when he set up that ambush. And what are you going to do about it? Whatever needs to be done. Rafi was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll pass along your recommendation. But Etan, be careful. This kind of thinking, it can eat you up, turn you into something you don't want to be. I'm already something I don't want to be. I'm just trying to make sure it counts for something. They finished their beers in silence. Outside, the city continued its endless noise, cars and music and voices, life happening in the light, while the shadows held their own conversations. When Etan got home that night, his daughter was already asleep. He stood in her doorway and watched her breathe, small and peaceful, and completely unaware of the world that existed beyond her bedroom walls. She would never know what he'd done in Tehran, would never know about the sewers or the bullets or the choice he'd made to survive. And that was how it should be. Some burdens weren't meant to be shared. He went to his office and opened his secure laptop, typed in the codes, accessed the files, found Nazari's photograph, studied the face, memorized every detail, the eyes, the smile.
The expression of someone who thought they were clever enough to stay ahead of the consequences. Then he opened a new file and began writing. A detailed operational plan, methods of approach, resource requirements, timeline. He titled it Operation Consequence, and he saved it in the folder marked Pending. Because some debts couldn't be negotiated away, some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, and some men didn't get to walk away just because they decided the game had gotten too dangerous. Nazari had made his choice when he executed the professor and set up the ambush. Now Etan would make his. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Because in the world of shadows, patience was just another weapon, and memory was the longest blade of all. Etan closed the laptop and went to bed. Outside, the city slept. Inside, the ghosts stayed awake. And somewhere out there, in some safe house in some anonymous city, a man named Darius Nazari was learning the most important lesson of the intelligence world. You can run from many things, but you can never outrun the Mossad. Not when they know your name. Not when they know your crimes. And especially not when someone who crawled 5 miles through the sewers has decided that your debt is due. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning.